They said he was too old to lead. That's what the young logistics officer muttered as he wheeled the old man's chair to the far back corner of the Joint Simulation Center, near a janitor's closet and beneath a flickering light that hadn't been fixed in weeks. Just protocol, she said under her breath, not unkindly, but not kindly either. He didn't answer, just gave a slow nod and folded his hands across his lap, the same way he used to before every briefing back in '73. No one noticed the way he scanned the projected terrain on the war table. No one asked why he kept glancing toward the faulty left flank in the simulation screen. And no one knew, not then, that the man they called Colonel Gramps had once rewritten NATO playbooks in real time with a pencil and 2 radios. But someone would notice, just not until the red phone rang and no one else moved. And when they finally opened the worn leather folder tucked under his coat, the room fell silent. Inside, there weren't just medals. There were sealed battlefield commendations, some with no dates, some with signatures marked classified until declassified, and one letter, handwritten, yellowed at the edges, bearing the seal of a U.S. general long since buried, stamped with 5 words that would change the tone of the room forever. If he speaks, listen closely. If you still believe that leadership doesn't age, and that silence can carry more weight than command, then like and subscribe. Because what happened that day proved one truth: experience never expires. And neither does honor. It started like a ceremony, the kind no one really attends for meaning anymore, just for the press photo. The Department of Defense had invited several honored guests to observe the final round of the Joint Strategic War Games, an annual exercise designed to pit emerging officers and strategists against simulated crisis scenarios, rogue states, cyber breaches, battlefield decisions under digital fire. Among the uniforms sharp enough to slice marble and boots polished like mirrors, he stood out, not because of flair, but because of contrast. Retired Colonel Douglas Rains, 78 years old, walked into the room not with authority, but with the humility of someone who had nothing to prove and yet had proved more than anyone present. They handed him a visitor badge that said "Observer," clipped it crookedly to his coat, and pointed him toward the back. No one asked for his opinion. No one remembered his name. One junior officer even joked as he passed, "Hope the old man brought his knitting." They laughed. Rains didn't. He just sat down, removed a small leather notebook from his coat pocket, and began to draw. Not doodles, grids, coordinates, lines. At 0917, the first simulated breach began, enemy units crossing into Allied zones. Lieutenant Grayson, bright-eyed and overly confident, ordered an aggressive counterstrike. 3 virtual platoons were wiped out. "Simulation glitch," he said. "Run it again." They did. Wiped out again. Across the room, Rains calmly turned a page. At 0952, a randomized command shift protocol initiated, a wildcard designed to simulate real-life battlefield disruption. The system beeped, and the war room AI announced, "Command authority transfer, Colonel Douglas Rains." At first, silence. Then laughter. Real, loud, uncomfortable laughter. "No way," Grayson chuckled. "We're letting a museum piece take the wheel." A few clapped ironically. One even offered a walker as a joke. Rains stood slowly. Not shakily, deliberately. He didn't walk to the command table. He walked past it. Straight to the old glass board mounted on the back wall, the one no one had touched in years. "I don't need your interface," he said simply. "I need your eyes." And then, chalk in hand, he began. He didn't shout. He didn't pace. He just drew. Rivers. Valleys. Thermal movement zones. He circled 3 regions and said, "They've been funneling your AI predictions into a false rhythm. You're being baited." At first, no one responded. Then one analyst leaned in. Then another. "Wait, he's right. The Southern Front isn't the target. It's the distraction." Rains didn't smile. He just nodded once. "Order Ghost Units Bravo and Echo to pull east and set a null flank curve. Don't advance. Let them come." They hesitated. Now, they obeyed. 10 simulated minutes later, the virtual enemy walked into a kill zone of their own making. 0 casualties. Total mission success. The room fell silent, not in awe, but in realization. The kind that crawls under skin and changes how you sit. Lieutenant Grayson stood stiff, his mouth dry. How do you know?" he muttered. Rains finally looked at him. Because I lost good men once in terrain just like this. And I never forgot the shape of regret. It wasn't just a win. It was a masterclass. General Simmons, who had stayed quiet in the corner most of the time, stepped forward, holding the leather folder that had quietly appeared in the war room moments earlier. Without announcement, he opened it and began to read. Colonel Douglas Rains. Operation Lancepoint, 1971. Rescued 43 hostages without support. Operation Emberlight, 1980. Restructured tactical retreat protocols used today in NATO evacuation. Simmons paused. This one's handwritten, he said. From General Holt. He read aloud. He leads without fanfare, commands with calm, and sees what others miss in the noise. If you ever forget what leadership sounds like, listen to his silence. When Simmons looked up, the room had already changed. Officers stood straighter. Some whispered. One cadet quietly wiped tears. They didn't give him a speech. They gave him space. When Rains picked up the chalk again, no one laughed. When he asked for a report, they raced to provide it. And when he left that night, they didn't applaud. They saluted. Unprompted. Quietly. As if something sacred had passed through them and left behind a mark too deep to describe. They'd come to a war game expecting bravado. But they left with reverence. Because age hadn't dulled the blade. It had only made the hand steadier. And Colonel Douglas Rains, once too old to lead, had reminded them that real leadership doesn't fade. It waits, for the moment it's needed most. By the next morning, the Pentagon didn't send flowers or medals, they sent silence. The kind that settles heavy in a room where hierarchy has just been humbled. Word had traveled fast. Whispers echoed in mess halls and operations wings, from enlisted kitchens to strategic briefings. Did you hear about the old man with the chalk? Colonel Rains. Yeah. He walked them right out of a digital ambush. But inside the Joint Simulation Center, the atmosphere had changed in quieter, more intimate ways. Chairs got nudged a little straighter. Junior officers waited for permission to speak instead of assuming it. And the folding chair at the back, Rains's chair, was no longer next to the janitor's closet. It had been moved, subtly, to the side wall near the main operations screen, not by order, but by respect. No announcement was made, but everyone knew why. He came back just as he had the day before, wearing the same old coat, the same scuffed shoes, and the same expression of calm that felt more commanding than a shout. A few young officers nodded now. Some called him sir. Not all, not yet, but the shift had begun. Lieutenant Grayson kept his distance. He hadn't spoken since the simulation ended, but he watched, closely, almost painfully. That afternoon, General Simmons requested Rains's presence for a closed-door scenario, a sensitive simulation involving a hypothetical multinational conflict. Urban warfare, minimal visibility, conflicting rules of engagement. Your experience navigating unclear authorization protocols during Operation Emberlight might prove valuable, the general said, as though anyone had forgotten the letter he'd read out loud yesterday. Rains gave a quiet nod and stepped up to the command interface, not flashy like the junior techs, just precise. He didn't redesign the plan. He questioned assumptions. Why are we assuming they'll breach here? He asked, pointing to the sector blinking red. That's what the predictive models suggest, the analyst replied. Rains nodded. That's what worries me. Then he pulled the screen back to a tactical satellite view. This is the real breach vector. Not because of the terrain, because of the history. He tapped a road no one had flagged. This was a withdrawal route during the 1983 conflict, still riddled with underpasses, angled approach lanes, and unused electrical channels. If I were them, I'd come in under the ghost line and pop up here. Silence. A second later, the system recalculated, and alarms flared. Red icons blinked exactly where he'd pointed. The simulated city had been compromised, just as Rains predicted. The general didn't smile. He just turned to the room and said, "Update your models." All of them. From that point on, no one called him observer. He wasn't background anymore. He was reference. Officers pulled him aside for quiet questions. "Colonel, how would you handle split-team divergence under compromised intel?" "Sir, what's your opinion on command silence during saturation fire?" And always, he answered with patience. Never ego. Never flourish. Just clarity, like a lighthouse that doesn't need to move to save ships. But for every new ally, there was a challenge. A major from the cyber defense wing rolled his eyes during one debrief. "Sure, the old man's got instincts," he said under his breath. "But this isn't the jungle. It's the network. He was silenced less than an hour later when Rain solved a simulated communications blackout in under 4 minutes without a laptop. Your frequencies are clean, Rains explained. But your fallback encoding still uses mirrored packets. You're clogging your own lanes. Flip the checksum structure. Prioritize signal, not encryption, when under time attack. And it worked. Perfectly. The Major never spoke again that day. That night, Rain sat alone in the break room, sipping black coffee from a paper cup, staring out a rain-dampened window. A cadet approached hesitantly. "Sir," she said, "how do you remember so much?" He didn't answer right away. Then he turned. "You don't remember everything. You remember what cost you the most." The cadet swallowed hard and nodded. Outside, storm sirens tested their alerts for an unrelated drill. But inside, it felt like the real alarm had already been sounded, the alarm of forgotten wisdom finally being heard again. Across campus, Lieutenant Grayson stood in front of a black monitor screen, watching playback from yesterday's simulation. He replayed Rains's comm commands. His hand-drawn maps. His unflinching tone. I mocked him, Grayson whispered to himself. I laughed at a man who could have taught me everything I didn't even know I needed to ask. That realization, more than embarrassment, cut the deepest. That he hadn't just doubted someone, he had refused to see him. And it was costing him something now he couldn't put words to. The next morning, without prompting, Grayson approached Colonel Rains in the hall. His salute was sharp, his voice low. "Sir, if there's time, I'd like to learn. From you. If you've let me." Rains looked at him for a long moment, then gave the faintest nod. "Be here at 0500. Quiet observation. No questions until we finish." "Yes, sir," Grayson replied. He didn't care that it meant waking earlier, standing longer, or being silent for hours. He just didn't want to miss whatever the rest of them had almost missed for good. And back in the command wing, General Simmons watched it all from behind his glass office wall. A quiet smile barely tugged at the corner of his mouth. He turned to his aide. "Issue a memo," he said. "We're no longer treating Colonel Rains as a guest." The aide blinked. "What designation, sir?" Simmons didn't hesitate. "Active consultant. Effective immediately. And get someone to update the personnel board outside. I want his service record printed and posted." Then he paused. "No, better yet, let's make them read it aloud at next week's leadership assembly." "All of it, sir?" "Every word," Simmons said. "It's about time they remembered how leaders are made." And so the man they said was too old to lead never asked for a title. But they gave him one anyway. Not for honor. Not for optics. But because in one room, one man, without rank or orders, reminded the entire command that real leadership doesn't announce itself. It walks in quietly, waits until the noise dies down, and then draws the way forward on a chalkboard, if it has to. They gathered in the main auditorium at 0700 sharp. An unusual time for an assembly, but no one questioned it. Not after what had happened over the last 48 hours. The message from command was short and clear: mandatory attendance. No exceptions. Dress uniform required. Officers, cadets, generals, they filed in one by one, rustling in silence, more curious than prepared. No slides were posted. No event banner stood at the front. Just a podium, a single spotlight, and a folded American flag resting quietly on a table nearby. The hush that settled wasn't scripted. It was respect pulling its chair forward. In the front row sat Colonel Douglas Rains, dressed not in uniform, but in the same dark wool coat, his hands folded, face unreadable. He hadn't asked for this. He never did. But today wasn't about asking. It was about remembering. General Simmons took the stage, not with pomp or dramatic pause, but with a single sheet of paper in his hand. "This is not a ceremony," he began, voice steady, echoing slightly through the marble-lined walls. "This is a correction." He looked down at the page. Colonel Douglas Rains. Commissioned, 1969. Special Operations Doctrine Development, 1974. Battlefield Tactical Lead, Operation Hollow Bridge, 1982. Commendation for Valor, Operation Emberlight, 1980. Evacuation strategist during the 1983 Saigon Embassy extraction simulation. Despite being retired from field command, personally consulted for route coordination under hostile conditions. He flipped the page. And this, he held it up, yellowed, handwritten, unmistakably old, is a personal letter from General T.J. Holt, postmarked 1985. He read it aloud. Rains doesn't lead like the rest. He's not loud, doesn't chase medals. But give him a broken map, a compromised line, and a room full of officers who've already lost, and he'll find a way to bring them home. I followed his voice in the dark, and I'd do it again blindfolded. A ripple moved through the crowd, not of noise, but of breath being held. Eyes lowered, postures straightened. Simmons continued. He never told anyone about this letter. Never mentioned half of what's in this file. Because that's not how real leadership works. He looked at Rains then. But we failed to honor what you carried. We mocked it. We almost missed it. He turned to the crowd. Some of you laughed. Some of you dismissed. All of us nearly forgot that rank may fade, but legacy doesn't. And then, without instruction, the room rose. Every single person. No order. No command. Just hundreds of boots against the floor as a slow, complete standing ovation filled the air, not with applause, but with silence, the sacred kind. Rain stood only when Simmons gestured him forward. He moved slowly, not from age, but from knowing exactly what this moment meant. He took the podium, cleared his throat once, and said only this. I didn't come here to teach. I came here to listen, to see if the fire still burns in those who hold the next torch. And I saw it. I did. He looked down, then up again. But fire without patience? That's a wildfire. It destroys what it should protect. You want to lead. He let the silence settle. Then start by shutting up long enough to notice who's already watching. A pause. Your men don't need perfect orders. They need to believe that when everything fails, you won't. He stepped back. Didn't linger. Didn't bask. Just nodded once and returned to his seat. Lieutenant Grayson stood before he could sit down and saluted. Sharp. Without pride. Without performance. Just truth. One by one they followed. Row after row of officers, cadets, even civilians in the back, all standing, all saluting, until the entire auditorium was still again, fists at brows, boots locked. When it was done, General Simmons returned to the mic. From this day forward, the Joint Simulation Training Wing will house a new briefing room. It will bear one name only, the Douglas Rains Tactical Wing. There was no applause, but there were tears. And when Rains returned to Red Pine Veteran Center that evening, something had changed. The nameplate outside his room no longer read Douglas Rains, Observer. It now read COL, Douglas Rains, RET, Strategic Commander, U.S. Military Doctrine Division. Below it, a note etched in brass. Experience doesn't expire. It leads. He didn't say much when he saw it. Just placed his hand on the plaque, nodded once, and whispered something to no one. Told you the chalk still worked. The next morning, a cadet stood outside the Red Pine Gate at dawn, holding a notebook. Then another. Then 5. They came not to gawk, but to learn. And inside, Colonel Rains did what he had always done best. Not speak loudly, not demand credit. Just waited, until the room was ready to hear him.